Welcome to Diplomacy and International Relations by Bastian Freiburg. If you're here to get past the headlines and understand the deep historical currents shaping today's global conflicts, you are definitely in the right place. Before we dive in, a quick reminder to please follow and subscribe. And if you want to support the show and get extra episodes, you can do that for a small monthly fee on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. The link's right there in the description.
It really does help us keep this going.
It does. Okay, so our mission today, we're doing a deep dive into the classic geopolitical theories that have, for over a century, shaped U.S. foreign policy in Eurasia. And we're asking a really critical question.
Yeah.
How has this new consolidated Heartland alliance between powers like Russia and China created what looks like a real strategic deadlock for the West?
It's a huge question, and you really can't understand it without looking back. Geopolitics, at its heart, it was never just an academic exercise. It was designed as an aid to statecraft,
A practical tool.
Exactly. And these theories, some from over 100 years ago, they give us this incredible structural frame for why today's conflicts are happening where they are.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Starting with the original nightmare scenario. This goes all the way back to, 1904, Sir Halford Mackinder?
That's the one. Mackinder, a British geographer, basically laid out the entire game board. He called Eurasia the world island.
The world island, right.
And at the core of that world island was what he called the Heartland, think through Central Asia, Eastern Europe, and the vast interior of Russia. It was the ultimate geopolitical fortress.
And he wasn't just drawing on a map. He was thinking about power, about who could control that space. What was the threat he saw coming from there?
The threat was consolidation. He looked at the map and saw that if a single powerful entity or a tight alliance could control the Heartland, well, that would be an existential threat to maritime powers.
Like the British Empire then, and the U.S. later.
Precisely. His specific fear, the real nightmare, was a combination of Germany's industrial and financial might with Russia's sheer size, its resources, its manpower.
So that combination would be unbeatable.
He believed it could neutralize sea power completely. If you control that central landmass, you could eventually command the entire world island, and from there, the world.
Which is what led to his very famous maxim.
It's a perfect bit of strategic logic. Who rules East Europe commands the Heartland. Who rules the Heartland commands the world island. Who rules the world island commands the world. It's so clear. East Europe is the pivot.
And we should be clear, this wasn't the only idea floating around at the time. Over in the U.S., you had Alfred Thayer Mahan pushing a very different theory.
A completely different perspective. Yeah, Mahan was all about thalassocracy, rule by the sea. For him, greatness was about naval fleets, controlling trade routes, and locking down strategic choke points around the globe.
A sea power view.
Totally. But what's really fascinating is that even Mahan, this champion of the oceans, was deeply worried about Russia's land expansion towards Central Asia. He saw it as something the Anglo-Saxon sea powers had to actively block.
So even the competing theory saw the Heartland as a threat. Okay, so if Mackinder drew this map of fear, how did that become actual U.S. strategy after World War II?
It became the blueprint. The entire doctrine of containment from the Truman Doctrine onwards was pure Mackinder.
You see the direct line.
It's explicit. The fear was that if the resources and people of Eurasia were united under a single hostile power, the survival of the United States as, a free nation would be at risk.
And George Kennan's famous 1947 strategy it called for, I think the phrase was, long-term, patient, but firm and vigilant containment of Russian expansive tendencies.
That's it. But crucially, Kennan wasn't saying fight them everywhere. His focus was very specific: defend the world's major industrial centers.
So Western Europe, Japan.
Western Europe, Japan, North America. The goal was to keep the Soviets boxed into the Heartland and out of what they called the Rimland, that critical coastal periphery.
Which brings us neatly into the post-Soviet world and Zbigniew Brzezinski. His 1997 book, The Grand Chessboard, really updated all of this for the modern era, didn't it?
It really did. Brzezinski basically took Mackinder's logic and applied it to a world with only one superpower. For him, Russia was still this geopolitical black hole that had to be kept isolated.
And he saw Western Europe as the key piece for the U.S.
The essential democratic bridgehead, as he called it, to project influence into Eurasia.
And of course, Brzezinski is probably most famous for spelling out exactly what Ukraine's role was in all this.
Oh, absolutely. He was incredibly blunt about it. He said that if Russia ever wanted to be an empire again, it needed Ukraine. period.
So for the West, Ukraine's independence was vital.
Vital. And for Moscow, he said a neutral Ukraine was simply non-negotiable. He laid out the collision course right there.
But his most important point, and this is really the key to the deadlock we're in now, was his warning, right, about how to handle Russia.
Yes. This was his ultimate piece of advice. He warned that America's grand strategy must avoid pushing Moscow away from what he called its best geopolitical choice.
Which was?
A rapprochement with the West. Integration, democratization, joining the Western market system. If Russia chose that path, the whole Mackinderian nightmare would just dissolve.
So here's where it gets really interesting, because the sources we're looking at argue that U.S. strategy failed at that exact point. Instead of pulling Russia west, post-90s policy ended up pushing it towards its greatest geopolitical rival.
Towards China.
Towards China, creating the very thing Mackinder feared most.
That failure, for whatever reason, whether it was NATO expansion or a failure to properly integrate Russia, it caused Moscow to just abandon those attempts at rapprochement. They turned east.
And they started actively building alliances to counter American influence.
That's what leads us to the modern Heartland bloc. You see it in formal organizations, like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SCO.
Started in 2001.
And then you have the expansion of BRICS. It started small in 2009, now it's got 9 members and a whole line of other countries wanting to join. But the real core of it, the strategic centerpiece, is that deep Sino-Russian alignment.
Sealed with that limitless friendship declaration right before the 2022 invasion of Ukraine.
Exactly. And when you look at what this new bloc represents, it just dwarfs Mackinder's original fear of a German-Russian axis.
I mean, the scale is just completely different.
It's massive. You're talking about a strategic space that includes 3 nuclear powers, maybe a 4th on the way. It controls vast energy and natural resources, oil, gas, critical rare earth minerals in Central Asia.
Plus the population, the growing tech sector.
It is, without exaggeration, a full-scale counter-hegemonic alignment, a genuine challenge.
So while the U.S. was focusing its containment strategy on Ukraine as the pivot in Europe, Russia was busy building other pivots all across Asia.
And that is the deadlock. The war in Ukraine is where you see this clash playing out. It's classic geopolitics, but it's mixed with modern ideology and hybrid warfare.
Tell me more about the ideology part. Russia is using this idea of the Russkiy Mir, the Russian world. What is that?
So this idea was really institutionalized around 2007. It's essentially the ideological justification for their expansionist policies. It has sort of 3 layers.
Okay.
First, it's about connecting with the Russian-speaking diaspora globally. Second, it's a claim to a geopolitical sphere of influence over the old Soviet space. And third, it's an ideological appeal to conservative right-wing forces everywhere to try and undermine liberal democracy from within.
And on the ground, that plays out as hybrid warfare.
Precisely. It's not just tanks and soldiers. It's a multidimensional strategy. You combine military force with cyber attacks, with massive disinformation campaigns on state media like RT and Sputnik.
Aimed at splitting public opinion in the West.
Exactly. Economic pressure, supporting separatist groups. The goal isn't just to win on the battlefield. It's to win in the psychological, social, and political arenas, too.
And since a lot of our listeners are here in Europe and in Denmark, it's worth pointing out that NATO itself is a product of this thinking.
It is. NATO was conceived as the ultimate Midland Ocean Alliance, Mackinder's term, for the North Atlantic powers uniting to contain the Heartland. That framework is still so relevant.
And you can see how those geopolitical instincts still play out differently, even within the alliance.
Oh, for sure. I mean, look at the split over the Iraq War in 2003. Germany was strongly against it, partly for domestic reasons, but also because it was pushing for a more independent European security role.
Right.
Whereas the UK went all in with the US, prioritizing that classic Atlantic-Midland Ocean relationship. It just goes to show you that these deep geopolitical factors are always there, shaping decisions.
The gravity is constant. Okay, so if the Heartland is consolidating like this, what's the countermove? This brings us to the other big theory from Nicholas Spykman, the Rimland.
Right. Spykman came after Mackinder and basically said, you're looking at the wrong piece of the board. He argued the real power wasn't in the Heartland, but in the coastal fringe surrounding it, the Rimland.
So Western Europe, the Middle East, India, coastal China.
Exactly. He said that's where most of the world's population, wealth, and crucially access to the sea is. Spykman's idea was, who controls the Rimland rules Eurasia. Who rules Eurasia controls the destinies of the world.
So the strategy is to control the periphery to contain the center.
Correct. And that is exactly what we're seeing today. The huge gravitational shift in U.S. foreign policy is away from the Atlantic and towards the Indo-Pacific.
Right.
The sources we've looked at suggest the U.S. is now focused on two big things. One, try to break up that Sino-Russian chemistry, and two, regain some control over what it sees as a disintegrating global order.
And in that big picture, where does Ukraine fit?
Well, this is the hard part. Support for Ukraine is seen as essential for credibility, especially to allies in Europe. But in the grand strategic calculus in Washington, it's increasingly viewed as a burden.
A drain on resources that are needed for the main event in Asia.
That seems to be the thinking. The long-term competition is with the Sino-Russian bloc, and that's centered in the Indo-Pacific.
So what this all means is we are literally watching a century-old geopolitical debate play out in real time with new alliances.
We are. It's Spykman's playbook in action. You look at things like the Quad, the U.S., Australia, India, Japan, or security pacts like AU.
Rimland and Outer Island states.
Collaborating specifically to prevent a single power from dominating Eurasia. And at the exact same time, you see China's Belt and Road Initiative pushing deep into Central Asia, the Heartland, trying to build the continental power base to challenge that U.S.-led maritime order.
It's just fascinating. Our deep dive really confirms it. These classic geopolitical theories, they are not history. They are the essential operating system for understanding the great power rivalry we're living through.
They absolutely are. And I think even with all this focus on the Indo-Pacific, the sources keep coming back to one point. True global dominance still depends on continental power, on who controls or influences Central Asia.
Which leaves us with a pretty provocative final thought.
I think so. As Europe is forced to shoulder more and more of the military and financial burden for Ukraine, you have to ask, how does that change the transatlantic balance in the long run?
Especially Germany's role in all of this.
Exactly. How does it change Germany's role in that classic Heartland versus Midland Ocean dynamic? That's a question that will define European security for decades.
A critical question for all of us here in Europe to think about. Well, that's all the time we have. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the historical forces that are shaping our world right now.
My pleasure.
If you found this useful, please do follow the podcast and help us reach more people by giving this deep dive a 5-star rating. We will be back very soon with more insights into global affairs. Until next time.